On the surface, their life looked unshakably ordinary. Claire and David had been married for over a decade, the kind of couple neighbors waved to from across driveways, assuming they had it all figured out. They lived in a quiet cul-de-sac lined with tidy lawns and trimmed hedges, where the loudest disturbances were lawnmowers on Saturdays or kids chasing each other in the summer twilight. From the outside, their marriage was a picture of stability. From the inside, however, subtle cracks were beginning to spread, ones Claire couldn't yet name, but felt all the same. David was dependable, or at least that's what Claire had always believed. He had a well-paying job in finance, a polished smile, and a knack for calming tense situations with a joke or a gentle hand on her shoulder. They shared routines, Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market, evenings watching shows together, and Sunday dinners where laughter softened the fatigue of the week. Yet over time, Claire began noticing changes so slight they were almost dismissible. Almost. At first, it was the late nights. David's office had always demanded long hours, but recently those hours seemed to stretch without end. He would call with excuses about last-minute meetings, looming deadlines, or clients in crisis. Claire, wanting to be supportive, swallowed her doubts. But the explanations carried a rehearsed quality, as if he'd practiced them before dialing her number. Sometimes when she pressed, he grew irritated too quickly, an edge in his voice that hadn't been there before. Then came the absences that didn't fit. David had always been home for dinner, even if late, yet suddenly he was missing meals several nights a week. When he did come home, he seemed distracted, like his mind was elsewhere. He brushed off her attempts at conversation, retreating into vague reassurances. Just tired, work's been insane, or you wouldn't want to hear about it. Claire wanted to believe him, but each dismissal left her feeling a little more shut out of her own marriage. The neighbor, Amelia, floated in and out of this picture like an afterthought. A woman in her late 30s, Amelia lived 2 houses down, though she often stopped by with friendly small talk. She was charming in a practiced way, with a smile that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. Claire never thought much of her beyond the occasional garden compliment or borrowed cup of sugar, but over the past few months, she noticed something. Amelia seemed to know when David was home or not. She would time her chats with Claire to when David was conveniently away, or sometimes Claire spotted her glancing toward their driveway as though keeping tabs. The thought was fleeting, too odd to make sense of, so Claire tucked it away. Claire's instincts tugged at her. She began waking in the middle of the night, the quiet of the house pressing in, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She noticed small details, an unfamiliar cologne scent lingering on David's shirt, receipts crumpled in his pockets for restaurants she didn't recognize, or the way he locked his phone with a new password and carried it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. They weren't smoking gun discoveries, but they piled up pebble after pebble until they became a mountain she could no longer ignore. Friends she confided in urged her not to overthink. "You've been married 12 years, Claire. You know him better than anyone," they said, and she wanted to agree. She wanted to believe her husband's absences were nothing more than work's unrelenting grip. But her gut told her otherwise, whispering that something far deeper and darker was slipping through the cracks. Claire tried to shake it off by immersing herself in her own routines, morning yoga, volunteering at the local library, planning dinner menus as if normalcy could smother her doubts. Yet every time David brushed past her with a distracted smile, her chest tightened with a mix of longing and dread. She remembered the man she married, the one who once looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Now he looked through her, as if distracted by a secret he wasn't ready to share. The unease spread like a shadow across her days. She found herself scrutinizing his tone, memorizing his excuses, second-guessing the way his eyes darted when she asked direct questions. The tension was invisible to outsiders but suffocating in the silence of their home. Claire wasn't ready to confront him, not yet. She told herself she needed more clarity, more proof, something undeniable. But beneath the quiet facade of their suburban life, the truth was already stirring. And though Claire couldn't see the full picture yet, her instincts had latched onto something real. David was living a life she knew nothing about. The double life was hiding in plain sight, just beyond her line of vision, waiting to break open. It began with little things, the kinds of details easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. Claire was paying attention. One morning, as she gathered laundry from the hamper, she found a crumpled receipt in David's pants pocket. The receipt was from a cafe across town, a place they had never gone together. The date and time stood out. It was stamped for a Tuesday afternoon, when David had told her he was at a late client meeting. She stared at the slip of paper, torn between rationalizing it and letting suspicion root deeper. Maybe he'd grabbed coffee on the way, she told herself. Maybe it was nothing. But the unease tightened in her chest. A week later, she noticed a second receipt, this time for groceries. Oddly specific items: almond milk, fresh strawberries, lavender-scented candles. David disliked both strawberries and scented candles. Claire set it aside, almost as if collecting evidence in a case she never meant to build. Each scrap felt heavier than the last. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. David's bank statements showed regular cash withdrawals from ATMs near a neighborhood they rarely visited. She noticed his shirt smelling faintly of laundry detergent that wasn't theirs, something lighter, floral, unlike the brands she used at home. At first, she felt crazy for even noticing, but the details stacked neatly, one on top of the other, until she could no longer brush them away. Claire also noticed how David's schedule began to align with Amelia's absences. Amelia, the neighbor who always seemed so available for chatter, was suddenly gone for stretches at the same time David claimed to be working late. Claire found herself watching from her kitchen window, seeing Amelia's lights off when David wasn't home, noticing her car pulling back in around the same time David returned from his supposed late-night work. The coincidences gathered like storm clouds. The keychain was another discovery. One evening, while helping him find his car keys, Claire spotted a small silver key she didn't recognize. It was tucked behind the familiar house and car keys, its teeth jagged and distinct. "Oh, that? Just a spare for the office mailbox," David said too quickly, pocketing the keys before she could examine them further. The answer felt rehearsed, his tone a fraction sharper than necessary. Claire started journaling. She told herself it was for her own sanity, to keep track of what she saw, what she felt, so she wouldn't second-guess her memory later. Each entry was clinical, detached, like she was documenting someone else's life. April 14th, David home after 11. Shirt smelled like different detergent. Said it was from gym towels, but he didn't have his gym bag. April 18th, receipt for groceries with items he doesn't use. April 23rd, Amelia absent same night, David stayed late. The journal became both a comfort and a torment. Writing gave her control, a sense of order, but every new entry confirmed what she didn't want to believe. The marriage she trusted was unraveling in her own handwriting. Her instincts sharpened, tuned to frequencies she had ignored before. She noticed how David carried his phone everywhere now, even to the shower, leaving it face down on the counter when he couldn't keep it on him. He had changed his password recently, brushing it off as a work security policy. Claire didn't press, though the explanation clanged false in her ears. Then came the scent. One night, when David hugged her absent-mindedly before bed, she caught a faint perfume clinging to his shirt. Not hers, not anything she owned. It was light, floral, with a trace of something sharp, like bergamot. The scent was foreign but distinct, and she remembered it the next morning when Amelia walked past their house. The perfume hung in the air, unmistakable. Claire felt her stomach drop. Was she imagining the overlap? Was her mind weaving connections that weren't there? She wanted to dismiss it, but the perfume lingered in her nose, an invisible accusation. The mounting clues didn't give her clarity so much as they deepened the ache of uncertainty. Claire vacillated between anger and denial, fear and resolve. One moment she would rehearse confronting him, demanding the truth. The next she would talk herself down, telling herself she was paranoid, desperate not to explode her marriage without proof. But the proof was circling her, pulling tighter each day. The receipts, the keys, the perfume, the absences. They weren't isolated oddities anymore. They formed a pattern, a puzzle only missing its final piece. Claire's nights grew restless. She lay awake listening to David's steady breathing, her mind cataloging every discrepancy. He seemed so peaceful in sleep while she carried the weight of his secrets. Sometimes she studied his face, wondering how he could lie so smoothly, how he could walk through the door each night and sit at the dinner table as though nothing were wrong. The doubt was no longer just in her head. It had stepped into the room, sat between them at meals, followed them into their bedroom. Something was wrong, and Claire, for all her fear, knew she couldn't ignore it much longer. The night she followed him, Claire didn't plan it. It wasn't some dramatic decision made in the mirror with a determined stare. It was quiet, instinctual, born out of too many sleepless nights and too many unanswered questions. David left just after dinner, muttering about a late conference call he couldn't take at home. He kissed her on the cheek, quick, mechanical, and walked out the door with his laptop bag slung across his shoulder. Claire stood at the window, watching his taillights disappear into the dark, and something inside her refused to stay still. She grabbed her coat, her keys, and slipped out 5 minutes later. Her hands trembled as she started the car, heart pounding in her ears. She felt foolish, like some caricature of a suspicious wife in a melodrama. But as she drove a careful distance behind him, the foolishness gave way to dread. She told herself she would only follow him for a few blocks, just to confirm he was heading downtown to the office. Just enough to prove to herself that she was overthinking. Except he didn't take the freeway toward his office. He turned off, heading into a residential area across town. Claire's breath caught. She followed at a crawl, headlights dimmed, praying he wouldn't notice her. The neighborhood was unremarkable. Rows of modest apartment buildings, narrow streets lit by yellow lamps, a corner market with flickering neon. Not the kind of place David had any business being. He pulled into the lot of a squat brick building, parked, and walked up the stairs as though it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't hesitate, didn't check over his shoulder. He simply unlocked the door to a second-floor unit and disappeared inside. Claire sat frozen in her car. Mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a client's place. Maybe a work errand. Maybe anything but what it looked like. But the key she'd seen on his chain, brushed aside with a lie. Her stomach twisted. She waited, watching the glow of a lamp flick on behind the blinds. Minutes passed. No one else came out. No one else went in. The apartment was his. Finally, unable to resist, she climbed from her car and approached the building. Every step felt reckless, like the ground might collapse beneath her. She stopped at the base of the stairs, listening. The hallway was quiet except for faint sounds behind the closed door. Footsteps, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of music from a speaker. David was inside, living another life. She crept closer, peering through a sliver in the blinds. What she saw knocked the air from her lungs. The apartment was fully furnished. Warm lighting, a couch with throw pillows, a kitchen stocked with dishes. Not a crash pad, not a temporary space, but a lived-in home. And there was David, moving comfortably, setting his laptop on the coffee table, pouring himself a glass of wine. He wore the expression she hadn't seen in years, relaxed, unburdened, almost joyful. Claire's hands shook against the windowsill. This wasn't a client's apartment. This wasn't a work errand. He belonged here in a way he no longer seemed to belong at home. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her chest ached, her throat tightened, and her vision blurred with hot tears she fought to contain. She wanted to storm inside, demand answers, but the fear of what she might hear held her back. Instead, she stumbled away, back down the stairs, and hurried to her car before her legs gave out. Driving home, the silence in the car roared louder than any scream. The questions battered her. How long had this been going on? How could he afford another place? And why? Why hadn't she seen it sooner? But beneath every question was the same brutal truth. David had carved out a secret life, and she had just seen the proof with her own eyes. When she slipped back into her house, the place felt alien, as if every familiar wall and piece of furniture had been tainted by the weight of what she knew. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark, head in her hands, unable to stop shaking. The apartment wasn't just evidence of betrayal, it was a monument to it. He hadn't been content with excuses and late nights. He had built an entire second life, hidden in plain sight, sustained by lies. Claire stayed awake until dawn, the memory of the apartment looping endlessly in her mind. She could still see him moving easily through that space, as though he'd been doing it for years. The thought burrowed deep. If he could build a secret life this big, how much of her own life had been a lie? The discovery wasn't an answer. It was the start of a darker, sharper set of questions. And though Claire didn't yet know it, the apartment was only half the story. The other half was far closer to home than she could have imagined. The image of David in that apartment haunted Claire. Days blurred into each other as she replayed what she'd seen, the casual way he'd poured wine, the comfort in his posture, the way the place looked lived in. He wasn't a visitor there. He belonged. But belonging with whom? The answer crept up slowly, piece by piece, until it was impossible to ignore. Amelia. The thought first came as a flicker, then grew into a steady flame. Amelia, the neighbor with the perfect smile, the one who had always seemed to hover at the edges of their lives. Claire remembered her showing up with homemade cookies last winter, joking lightly about David's taste in wine. She remembered how Amelia's gaze lingered on him during small talk, a glance Claire had brushed off at the time as nothing more than friendliness. But now, with the apartment in mind, every memory sharpened into a clue. Claire started noticing details she had previously dismissed. Amelia's car was gone on the same nights David claimed to be working late. When David returned home, Amelia's driveway lights flicked on soon after, as though synchronized. It wasn't coincidence, it was choreography. They were moving to the same rhythm, one Claire hadn't realized she was hearing until now. The decor of the apartment replayed in her mind as well. The throw pillows on the couch, embroidered with bright geometric patterns, were identical to the ones Amelia had once pointed out in a catalog Claire had left on the kitchen counter. "These are so chic," Amelia had said with a laugh. "I'd buy them in a heartbeat." Claire had thought nothing of it at the time. Now those pillows were on David's secret couch. It didn't stop there. On the kitchen counter in the apartment, she'd spotted a glass jar filled with lavender sprigs, a signature detail. Amelia loved lavender. She grew it in her garden, clipped sprigs for neighbors, even tucked small sachets into gift bags during the holidays. Lavender was Amelia's touch. Lavender was in David's secret apartment. The pieces clicked with a cruel precision. Claire began to feel the walls of her own home closing in. The betrayal wasn't miles away, faceless or nameless. It was just 2 doors down, wrapped in a neighbor's smile. The intimacy of it made her skin crawl. This wasn't just an affair. It was an invasion. Her marriage, her home, her trust, all violated within walking distance. She tested her theory by watching. She sat at her kitchen window, pretending to read while keeping an eye on Amelia's comings and goings. One evening, David claimed he had to work late again. 30 minutes later, Amelia left her house, dressed neatly, carrying a small overnight bag. Claire's throat tightened. Hours passed before Amelia's car returned, minutes after David's did. It was enough. The coincidence had become confirmation. The realization hollowed Claire out. She thought of the countless times she had confided in Amelia, trading pleasantries about the weather, laughing over neighborhood gossip. Amelia had stood in her kitchen, sipping coffee, asking about her marriage with a tilt of her head that now seemed laced with mockery. All the while Amelia had known. Claire couldn't look at her the same. Each wave from across the street became a knife twist. Every cheerful hello carried the weight of deceit. At night, lying awake next to David, Claire stared at the ceiling, her mind running endless loops. Did Amelia gloat about it? Did they laugh at her behind her back? Was her whole life, the dinner parties, the friendly neighbor exchanges, just a smokescreen for their secret? The intimacy of their betrayal was worse than the act itself. If it had been some stranger, some faceless woman in another part of town, it would have hurt. But this was calculated cruelty. David hadn't just betrayed her, he'd brought the betrayal into her daily life, embedding it in the rhythm of her street, the smile of her neighbor. The weight of it became unbearable. Claire found herself shrinking from the world, avoiding small talk, retreating into herself. Every creak of the floorboards, every late-night excuse from David, every glimpse of Amelia's silhouette through the window across the street, it all pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. But beneath the despair, something else began to stir. A resolve. Claire had uncovered the truth piece by piece, quietly, carefully. Now she knew who was inside that apartment with her husband. The question was no longer if he was betraying her. It was how long she would let it continue. The neighbor's smile was no longer a mask Claire could tolerate. And sooner than David or Amelia realized, Claire's silence would end. Claire no longer lived in her marriage, she investigated it. Each day became a quiet excavation, peeling back layers of David's life until the man she thought she knew stood hollow, his secrets spilling out. She started with the practical evidence. Late one night after David fell asleep, she slipped his wallet from the nightstand and sifted through its contents. Receipts, loyalty cards, folded notes. She found one from a boutique grocery store near the apartment, the same place that sold lavender bundles and artisan bread Amelia loved. Another was for a wine shop, a variety David never drank at home, but that she had once heard Amelia rave about at a neighborhood barbecue. Claire's journal swelled with details, dates and times, purchases and patterns. What once looked like paranoia now resembled a case file, neat columns of evidence proving a life lived outside of hers. Bank statements were next. With careful hands, she logged into their joint account and combed through transactions. Cash withdrawals lined up with his supposed late nights. Purchases showed up at stores she'd never visited. He was funding a second household in plain sight, masking it with vague excuses and half-truths. It was brazen, and it made her blood run cold. But the hardest unraveling wasn't financial. It was emotional. Each memory she revisited felt poisoned. She recalled dinners where David's phone buzzed incessantly, and he excused himself with a tight smile. She remembered Amelia's odd remarks about David's work trips, as though she knew the schedule too well. She even thought back to moments in their bedroom. David distracted, distant, going through motions while his mind was elsewhere. Claire realized he had likely been splitting himself in two for years, compartmentalizing his life with terrifying ease. Her fury grew with each discovery, but so did her grief. She wasn't only losing her husband, she was losing the history they had built. Every memory she tried to hold on to was stained by the possibility that Amelia had been there in the shadows, waiting, taking pieces of him that should have belonged only to Claire. There were moments when Claire doubted her strength. Some nights she sat on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to her chest, whispering to herself that maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the affair was just a passing lapse, something that could be salvaged. But the image of the apartment always rose in her mind, furnished, stocked, infused with lavender. That wasn't a fling. That was a second life. She needed confirmation beyond doubt. One evening she trailed him again. This time she parked further away, watching as David arrived at the apartment building. Minutes later, Amelia appeared, smiling, her bag slung casually over her shoulder. She climbed the stairs without hesitation, using her own key. Claire gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. There it was, their truth, exposed under the hum of the street lamps. Amelia had a key. Amelia wasn't just a visitor. She was a resident in David's secret life. The sight gutted her, but it also sharpened her. The betrayal wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact, undeniable enough to hold in her hands like a blade. She began collecting harder evidence. Photographs of their cars parked side by side at the apartment, screenshots of financial statements, the journal entries she had carefully logged. Each piece added to the story, building a foundation she could stand on when the time came to confront them. And yet part of her still longed for an explanation. A confession that would make sense of the senseless, a reason to cling to. Why had he done it? Wasn't she enough? Had their marriage been doomed long before she noticed? The questions churned endlessly, but she knew answers wouldn't undo the damage. The unraveling of David's double life left Claire raw, but it also woke something inside her. The shock was over. Now came the reckoning. She was no longer the wife who accepted vague excuses. She was the woman who had pieced together the truth when no one else would. In the silence of her living room, with her journal spread open before her, Claire made a quiet vow. The lies had stolen enough from her. Soon she would drag the truth into the open, no matter how ugly it was. The double life wasn't just David's anymore. It was hers to expose. The night Claire decided to confront him, The air in the house felt charged, as though the walls themselves braced for impact. David had just returned from another late client meeting. His tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled as though to signal exhaustion. He tossed his keys on the counter, kissed her absent-mindedly on the forehead, and poured himself a drink. To anyone else, he looked like a man winding down after a long day. To Claire, he looked like a liar preparing for another performance. She waited until he settled on the couch. Laptop open, pretending to scroll through emails. Claire stood in the doorway, her journal clutched tightly in her hand, her chest rising and falling in deliberate rhythm. "We need to talk," she said, her voice flat. David glanced up, distracted, already impatient. "Can it wait? I've got a deadline." "No," she cut him off. The firmness startled even her. She crossed the room, placed the journal on the coffee table, and opened it to a page filled with dates and notes. "I know, David. About the apartment. About Amelia." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. For a moment silence stretched so taut it hummed. David's eyes flicked to the journal, then to her face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. What are you talking about?" His voice cracked slightly, the mask slipping at the edges. "Don't do that," Claire said, her voice steady but shaking underneath. "Don't insult me with denials. I've seen you. I followed you. I watched Amelia walk into that apartment with her own key." She slid photographs across the table. Grainy images of his car parked outside. Amelia climbing the stairs, their lights glowing together behind drawn blinds. His hand hovered over the pictures, but didn't touch them. His face drained of color, and for a moment he looked less like her husband and more like a man cornered. "It's not what it looks like," he whispered hoarsely. Claire let out a bitter laugh. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare stand there and reduce my sanity to paranoia after everything I've seen. It's exactly what it looks like." David's defenses crumbled in waves. First came denial, shaky and transparent. Then anger. He accused her of spying, of invading his privacy. When that failed, he shifted to justification, rambling about stress at work, about feeling suffocated, about Amelia, just understanding him in ways Claire didn't. Each word was another blade, each excuse a reminder of how deeply he'd chosen betrayal over honesty. "And me?" Claire demanded, her voice rising. "Did I not give you everything I had? Did I not stand by you for 12 years believing every late-night excuse, defending you to my friends, building a life with you? You didn't just cheat, David. You built a second home, you built a second marriage, and you did it 2 doors down." His shoulders slumped. For the first time he looked broken, not by guilt but by the collapse of his careful construction. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he murmured, eyes cast down. "It just happened." "Things like this don't just happen," Claire shot back. "They're chosen. Every receipt, every key, every night you lied. You chose this. You chose her." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Claire froze. David's head snapped up, eyes wide with a fear that confirmed what she already suspected. Amelia. Claire strode to the door and yanked it open before David could stop her. And there she was. Amelia, framed in the porch light, holding a small bag, her expression casual until she saw Claire standing there instead of David. The color drained from her face. "Amelia," Claire said, her voice cold steel, "you might as well come in. No more secrets tonight." The neighbor hesitated, glancing at David, who looked stricken, then back at Claire. Slowly, she stepped inside, her composure cracking under the weight of exposure. The 3 of them stood in the living room, the silence unbearable, each one locked in the gravity of the moment. Claire turned to Amelia. "How long?" Amelia swallowed, her voice barely audible. "A year. Maybe longer." Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it, only raw disbelief. She looked at David, who couldn't meet her gaze, and felt the last remnants of their marriage collapse like ash. The confrontation wasn't loud by the end. There was no storm of plates crashing, no violent theatrics. It was quieter, sharper, the kind of truth that left silence ringing louder than shouts. Claire stood there, her spine straight, her breath steady, while the man she married and the neighbor she trusted fumbled with broken excuses. For the first time in months, she felt clarity. The truth was out, standing in the room with them. And though it shattered her world, it also freed her from the prison of doubt. The house was never quiet again, not in the same way. After that night, silence carried weight. Too many unsaid words, too many fractures no apology could mend. David moved through the rooms like a shadow, subdued, tentative, as though he still lived there, but no longer belonged. Amelia disappeared for a time, her curtains drawn, her car absent from the driveway. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Whispers floated between mailboxes and coffee lines. But Claire no longer cared about whispers. Her truth was already louder than gossip. The first days after the confrontation felt like walking on shards. Claire vacillated between numbness and volcanic rage. She went through the motions, waking, eating, working, but every routine felt hollow, each corner of the Eowyn house echoing with betrayal. She couldn't touch the bed without seeing Amelia's perfume in her mind. Couldn't open the closet without imagining David packing clothes for his second home. She filed for divorce within weeks. The papers arrived at David's office, not the house. She didn't want to watch his expression when he read them. When he came home that evening, he tried to plead, his voice low, his eyes rimmed red. He promised change, begged for another chance. Claire listened in silence. She had no more words to give him, no more energy to fight for a marriage he had abandoned long before she knew. "You didn't just make a mistake, David," she said, her voice steady. "You built an entire life without me, and you made me live next door to it." He didn't argue. He just looked at her with the hollow eyes of a man who had finally lost the thing he thought would always be his. Amelia faced her own fallout. Neighbors turned cold, friends drifted away. Claire heard whispers of Amelia moving in with a relative out of town, unable to bear the stares, the judgment. Claire didn't revel in it, but neither did she pity her. Amelia had stepped willingly into Claire's life and torn it apart with a smile. Consequences were inevitable. For Claire, healing didn't arrive in grand gestures. It came in small, stubborn acts of reclaiming her life. She painted the bedroom walls a different color, something bright and clean. She replaced the bed. She gave away old dishes and bought new ones in styles David would have hated. Each change was a quiet declaration. This space is mine now. There were nights she broke down, of course. Nights when the weight of loneliness pressed against her chest, when she stared at the empty side of the bed and wondered if she had failed somehow, if she had driven him away. But those nights grew fewer as time passed. Her journal, once a record of his lies, became a space for her own thoughts again. She wrote about books she read, places she wanted to visit, things she wanted to try. Slowly, she began to sound like herself again. One Saturday, she drove past the apartment, the hidden one, and found the windows dark, the mailbox taped over, the unit vacant. It looked lifeless, stripped of the secrecy that once made it pulse with stolen time. Claire parked for a moment, staring at the empty blinds. This place had been the epicenter of her undoing, a shrine to betrayal. Now it was just another empty unit waiting for new tenants. It struck her then. Even the darkest secrets lose their power once exposed. She drove away without looking back. Months later, Claire stood at her front door, watching the sunset settle over the cul-de-sac. The air was cool, lavender blooming faintly in her garden. She inhaled deeply, no longer associating the scent with Amelia, but reclaiming it as her own. The betrayal had scarred her, yes, but it hadn't defined her. She was still here. When friends asked how she managed, she told them the truth. You learn to stop asking why someone betrays you. You start asking why you let yourself stay in the dark for so long, and then you promise yourself never again. The aftermath wasn't clean, wasn't easy, but it was hers. And as Claire closed her door that evening, leaving the world outside, she felt something she hadn't in months. Peace. Because sometimes survival isn't about holding on to what was lost. It's about stepping into what comes next, unafraid, even if the path is unknown.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.